Does the U.S. produce more PhDs than are needed to staff our colleges and universities? And does this undermine full-time tenure-track hiring by facilitating the hiring of more precariously employed academics, especially the hiring of part-time faculty, who now constitute just under 50% of all faculty? Rather than focus on supply as an explanation why institutions seek greater flexibility in employment, recent research and policy conversations emphasize how demand has changed. The dominant argument maintains that declines in state funding, with its concordant increase in reliance upon tuition, make it more difficult for public institutions to offer steady, full-time employment. While this shift is very real, 2- and 4-year public, private, and for-profit institutions would have been unable to change their employment practices were there not a ready supply of candidates to take whatever position was offered. Our research supports the standard economic presumption that both demand and supply are important, and more importantly, that markets for part-time employment are best understood as local phenomena. We believe that this has significant implications for where and how policy reforms may be enacted. Shifts in the composition of faculty appointments pose two important policy concerns. One interrogates the rise of academic contingency and how that affects faculty themselves, while the other involves the situation regarding students. Teachers' unions frequently point out teacher working conditions are the students' learning conditions, and in that sense, the separation of faculty and student effects could be viewed as artificial if it were not for the fact that the welfare of faculty is an independent consideration. Prior research reveals high levels of dissatisfaction among a significant element of part-time faculty, though some faculty clearly choose part-time work in their retirement or to facilitate their roles as parents or caregivers, or as a meaningful way to share the expertise of their professional lives. As many as half of part-time faculty would prefer full-time employment. Their employment is typically unsatisfactory due to low wages, poor benefits, job insecurity, and weak integration within their academic units, as well as a perception of a debilitating second-class status. Connecting such employment conditions to student learning has, unfortunately, become too easy. Lacking long-term contracts, insecure faculty have an incentive to avoid potential conflict by grading students leniently. Time pressures reduce faculty availability and weaken incentives to create written or other time-intensive assignments. Faculty who take on multiple jobs to make ends meet tend to be less available for office hours, and students who need references may have difficulty just finding their instructors as they lack phones, offices, or often enough, may have quietly separated from their institution and moved on to their next gig. Studies have also shown that as institutions increase the ratio of their faculty who are hired part-time, graduation and transfer rates all tend to decline. Low status wages and insecurity make it harder to recruit well-qualified candidates. While degrees are not necessarily the best evidence of quality, part-time faculty are much less likely to have a PhD at community colleges as well as at 4-year institutions.
Our manuscript explores whether and to what extent the supply of graduate students influences the level of part-time employment. After the 1960s and 70s heyday in academic employment collapsed, discussions of an oversupply of graduate students were taken seriously, not least by Bowen and Sosa, whose authoritative 1989 analysis asserted that any oversupply would be corrected when the baby boomers retired, and that such a day was fast approaching. However, in spite of retirements and enrollment growth, full-time tenure-track hiring was not restored. By the 2000s, it became commonplace to suggest that reductions in state funding prevented any return to the golden era. The most notable demand-side theory was put forward by Mark Bosquet, who argued that universities have become addicted to low-wage labor, especially that of their own graduate student assistants. In this scenario, Bosquet declared the PhD itself to be the waste product of a university graduate education, not its purpose. However, Bosquet argued that to cut back on graduate student assistance would only lead universities to employ low-wage part-time faculty from outside their institutions instead. And though we share many of Bosquet's concerns, we believe that his analysis contributed to a failure to research part-time markets on their own terms, as research shifted almost exclusively to conditions affecting demand nationally. This may have made sense during academia's heyday when tenure-track faculty dominated, but by 2000 the market for part-time faculty had long been well established, and it operated in its own distinct manner. In particular, part-time faculty are drawn almost exclusively from local environs, particularly as colleges and universities are typically unwilling to incur the expense of national searches to teach a limited set of courses. Faculty for these positions can generally be recruited among individuals who are place-bound by family or other circumstances. Limited competition makes place-bound candidates more exploitable. Even competitive offers may leave a candidate employed less than full-time. Our study differs from prior studies in that we create a meaningful measure for the supply of local candidates possessing advanced degrees. We used a series of geographic buffers in QGIS, which is an open source GIS program, to aggregate the number of students who had earned master's or PhD degrees in the prior years within 25, 50, and 100 miles of the hiring institution. Institutional level data on doctoral and master's completers were drawn from data reported by the National Center for Education Statistics through IPEDS. Quartile and regression analyses were applied to our data to show that higher levels of advanced degree production is statistically significant with respect to the ratio of part-time faculty at nearby colleges. Moreover, these measures of supply show greater correlation to employment patterns than do simple codes of urbanization used in prior studies.
It is possible to read too much into our finding, and further work will be helpful. Clearly, our measure of supply is a proxy and should not be taken too literally. Not only are recent graduates available, but so too are graduates from much earlier cohorts, as are similarly qualified migrants. Still, the fact that our measure consistently shows correlations across different types of institutions suggests that recent graduates are, as our intuition suggests, an important component of the supply of candidates available for part-time work. That many such graduates do not seek academic careers is also important. At the same time, our results show that graduates possessing a master's degree are typically better correlated to part-time employment than is our measure involving recent doctorates. And that serves as a reminder that these part-time markets can be satisfied without the production of PhDs. With this in mind, we want to assert that our suggestion for policy reform is not simply to cut back on supply, but more importantly, to ensure that all policy actors coordinate their activities to improve the quality of academic employment and student learning. We believe our findings provide critical information for policymakers concerned over precarious part-time academic labor. Our results suggest where and how reforms might be fruitfully enacted. Most importantly, we see a role for the university to play in protecting its own graduate students. By working with local institutions, they may be successful at resetting labor standards. Getting universities to assume responsibility for their graduates' employment may take a social movement campaign. However, understanding this as a local, not a national issue, provides more realistic opportunities for universities to coordinate with colleges in their region to search for ways to reward those who provide better standards and punish those who don't. If universities are unwilling to do this on their own, local legislators, accreditors, or unions who understand how academic markets work may be inclined to persuade them to take on that task.